Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. UberBear, and my co-pilot...
At Stu MTG.
It's now getting longer every time. Pretty soon it's going to be hashtag.
I think I think it should be known by anyone who's interacted with us on Twitter that I've kind of embraced that moniker at this point. But yeah,
I like Just Stu. I kind of want to just be Just UberBear now. That sounds fantastic. I'm just going to change that out.
Just Bear.
Yeah, Just Bear. I like it. Anyways, so we've got an exciting, interesting, dynamic episode lined up for our listeners this evening. But before we get into it, we're going to do a little teaser as we've been doing, and we're gonna name this one Aristo-Kats with a K for coolness. K for cool. Yeah. One of the not so great Disney films.
Yeah, I was gonna say not like the Disney film.
We have in fact bobbled over the word Aristocrats on numerous occasions, and I have called it Aristo-Kats. Stu has called it Aristo-Kats. We have debated on Oliver and Company, but I got to thinking before we even get going into this, I'm gonna put Stu on the spot.
Okay,
Stu, what is your favorite Disney cartoon of all time?
Fantasia.
I did not expect that.
Questions.
There, in fact, is a newer version. Fantasia is actually pretty great if you haven't, but mine, in fact, is Lilo and Stitch, man. I mean, Lilo and Stitch, just Elvis as a soundtrack. You can't do better than that.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. And I really didn't dig that vibe of that 1970s, 60s sketch cartoons where kind of the 101 Dalmatians, the Aristo-Kats. The only one that I will let slide by, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this, is Robin Hood. And if anyone hasn't noticed yet, our logo for UberCube is 100% inspired by Little John, which is the bear who is Baloo in Jungle Book. If you haven't, you just learned that, then welcome to the fold. But he happens to be wearing, in our logo, it's Prince John's crown. And he looks beat to hell for a reason, because he took it. And that is why he is the Uber Bear. All right.
Fascinating.
Tangents for no reason.
We'll see if that stays in. But
we will. No, we're going to keep it. It's a good time. We're here to have fun. So we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm drinking a Guinness. It's my usual. Everyone knows about
Guinness,
it. But you're drinking something with a little bit more panache today.
Yeah, I went a little bit more interesting. I mean, we are going to be talking about Aristocrats, and I figured this is the closest one. We've done this in a previous episode. I am having White Zombie White Ale by Catawba Brewing Company. It's located out of North Carolina. It is in particular kind of a white ale, a little bit of zest to it.
Crack it.
Let's crack it. All right, let's get this little...
All right, so Aristocrats or Aristocrats, take us away.
All right, so we're going to kind of go over this and break it down. So the purpose of the build is it's pretty straightforward. Most people are familiar with it. It's going to be build up small empire of creatures, and then you're going to have specialty creatures, and whenever loss of said creatures, they're going to get penalized for it.
Yep.
Incremental damage is basically just your... Traditionally, onesies and twosies at best, right?
Yes.
With some other payoffs. The general components of this type of build is going to be sack fodder, sack outlets, and sack payoffs. And by sack, I mean sacrifice for those who are unfamiliar with this term.
Right. So the sack fodder is ideally creatures that either maybe have an undeath trigger, maybe you can return them from the graveyard, that kind of stuff. Any creature will do.
Spin ETBs.
But it's nice to have a little bit of bit of candy thrown on top.
What's neat about this particular archetype is it's good for trade-offs. It makes it really uncomfortable combat decisions. It makes battlefield decisions. If someone chooses to attack with a creature, say for instance like a reclamation sage or something that's already utilized its ETB effect and the battlefield effect, and now goes in for an attack with a small 2/1 creature. The person with the Aristocrats on the other side of the field, i.e., let's say Zulaport Cutthroat or Blood Artist that we're going to talk about in a few moments, they don't mind having that trade-off. Either they get the 2/through or you block it, you absorb it, and then they ping you exchange, either gain a life, lose a life. It's kind of a incremental cause and effect type situation that's going to happen. It's neat. As far as particular notes on the archetype, just these are my general thoughts on the matter. We'll find out Stu agrees. I would say that in my opinion, it performs best in lowered powered environments or thematic environments.
I would agree with that.
I.e., I run it in my horror cube. I run it in my Munson Lord of Metal cube. Lord of Metal. I run it in my Femme Fatale cube, and I run some components of it within my Artifact cube. And a little tiny taste of it actually, in fact, in my Two-Headed Giant cube. Matter of fact, out of the large majority of my cubes, I do have some components because most of those are lower tier.
I feel like it can work in a two-headed giant cube because you've got like each opponent.
Yeah, it does. It penalizes
with the payoffs,
rate.
So you do get that like double effect from each of the sacrifices. So I like that.
It turns your the opponent from taking 1 damage into 2 damage. So
Exactly.
it gets a lot stronger in that particular environment. Which we will be covering two-headed giant at some point in the future. I have one that we're going to cover. But anyways, we don't get hung up on the two-headed giants too much this evening. All right, so I tested it out in power. It was too slow.
It takes too much setup.
It's too much setup.
A lot of creatures that don't really do a whole lot by themselves. It requires a number of pieces that are just individually fairly weak. And in a high power environment, when you're facing off against Storm, Reanimator, high power aggro, stuff like that, it's not good enough.
And then it cross pollinates well with things like Reanimator. When you got something coming in and out of the graveyard back and forth, you get the exchange on incremental damage if you want to do it, and or it also gives aggro type like Rakdos attack decks. Additional reach and or Orzhov attack decks.
Yeah, if you've got effects that are coming in, where you're and my memory's not good for cut, but there's creatures that ETB, they're black, they enter, and each player sacrifices a creature, which is
you mean like edict effects?
It's an edict effect,
large scale edict effects.
I get
those
are awesome because now you're getting a bit of double dipping on what the effect is.
Yeah, so everybody's going to sacrifice a creature. If you've got some kind of effect that does that, it works great in EDH. You'll typically see this a lot in Commander. Even a lot, and so it's lower power. And like I said, I'll highlight it in lower power cubes. Yeah. But at my high powered vintage, like I said, I did try it out at one point, just because I wanted to do something different. Variety's the spice of life. It just didn't get there. It was just kind of onesies and twosies for incremental damage. Might have got some payoffs for some black aggro or some Rakdos attack, but outside of that, it didn't do a whole lot.
No,
and it was just wasting card slots in that particular environment, in my opinion.
It does. Yeah.
So it's really
if you don't have Storm in there, you can't put Aristo-Kats in power. I'm sorry.
Aristocrats. We got you really hung up on the cats now, but that's okay. We're going to be going back and forth. All right, and the next one is, and we kind of talk about, and this is probably a little bit of a juxtaposition to what I said, but this can be a long reach. It's a solid payoff and a stacks type strategy, and that kind of ties in. It's kind of like the edict effects that you talked about before. We're not really going stacks like braids type stacks, but
maybe mono black.
You could. That gets more in the commander-ish, I think. Less than when I say those type of effects, I'm thinking the highest power levels because they're punishing.
Sure.
Okay, when I'm stepping down and I'm saying this is a mid-tier type of effect.
I would agree. It's kind of fringe, but it's worth mentioning.
Maybe what I said is fringe, but at least it's still there.
Yep.
Stu, do you mind covering the strengths of the package?
Yeah, so the strengths are, and I like this first one because I think this will ring true to a lot of people, at least ones that I've interacted with. It's fun. It's kind of a fan favorite, right? Yeah. Because there's a lot of things that you get to do. There's some decision making. Which creature do I sack? Am I going to bring a creature back from the graveyard that I maybe have to pay for, like a reassembling skeleton, or do I want to leave some mana up? Am I going to go absolutely all out with a sack creature that adds its power to itself and try and alpha for the win? I feel like it's a fairly technical deck, and I'll lead that into the next point, right? It does encourage fairly technical deck building. You can't just be like, I'm just going to throw a bunch of effects in there. You do have to really think about the numbers, think about the effects. Can you sort of push it over the line? So,
and what I like about it too is even though it's the Aristocrats in themselves, like a Blood Arst effect or something like that, they may say, we exchange damage, you take one, I gain one, etc.
Yep.
But they don't put you on rails. The deck does not build itself, as Stu's put out. You can diversify this build. You don't have to. You can do Mardu, you can do Orzhov, you can do Rakdos, or you can even do Golgari. I mean, you can just kind of get your own flavor, and you can just splash a couple of these. It doesn't have to be the central point. You just want to get some incremental damage because you're playing a slower, more clock down type of game.
Yep. So discourages board wipes is an interesting plus point, which almost seems a little bit like, what? They got a bunch of creatures. Why wouldn't I want to wipe the board? Well, I'll be certain to say that I would be more than happy to sandbag at least one of the payoff effects just in case of a board wipe. And then what are you getting rid of? Are you getting rid of the creature that I'm just going to bring back from the graveyard in the next turn or two? Or, am I just happy to sit back and just deal you 1 or 2 damage and maybe use removal on your threats?
I just played this in a Pauper Cube environment last night, and I personally do not sandbag. I put them all out front. But what I do is I actually get 3 or 4, even in a Pauper environment, Reanimator type return to hand spells. That's my counter to the pyroclasm, and I know that's not in a pauper environment, but those type of effects is going to get, -2.
I think that's a good deck building strategy. Yeah. I think that if you have that in your deck and you can fairly reliably get your stuff back, then great. If I feel that maybe, hey, I've really only got, a couple, 2 or 3 of the payoff cards, and I want to maybe be a little bit cautious in case I lose them, maybe I'll be cautious about which ones I put out there. But yeah, I would agree, sort of to follow on with that, it's a pretty aggressive strategy, right? Because you are utilizing a lot of resources to like get things back and forward and do that damage, but you're not dealing or putting onto the battlefield these gigantic creatures, so you do have to be kind of aggressive, I feel, in getting the opponent's.
And then I like doing that, and I'm going to mess the names up. It was like Nantuko Husk or whatever. Yep. It gets +2/+2.
That's exactly right.
That's a pauper card, but in a pauper game we played last night, where I would sacrifice and I'm just going to not even worry about it. It was a particular skeleton. It was like a resembling skeleton. It was something, a 1-drop that I could basically cycle in for 3, and then I would sack it to the Nantuko Husk to keep bolstering the Husk because it kept getting +2/+2.
Yep.
And then kept looping back in the creature from the graveyard at instant speed. So when the attack went in, that's what I liked about it. None of that's not really an Aristocrats, but whenever you have Hissing Iguanodire or whatever that is.
Hissing Iguana,
whatever it is. I'm hosing that one hard.
You are.
But whenever you have that out, they're getting pinged in addition to the large scale attack. I mean, I was taking you pretty close to lethal. I was clocking lethal quickly.
I played against that deck and it absolutely kicked my butt. So yeah, I feel that. Discourages board wipes is, again, what we talked about, like has some plus and minuses. It does, I feel, pair well with other strategies. We already sort of briefly mentioned on that. I do feel like it does hit well with the Reanimator, and it does hit well with aggro.
Right.
Allows you like, hey, I'm just going to swing with some of these creatures. A lot of the ones that we're talking about, the sack outlets, and even some of the payoffs, they're not super high mana cost, right? 1 or 2. I'm happy to just start banging these out and try and get your life total down. And then if I get to the point where you've put a couple of creatures on the board that I can't get through, then I can just start on that Aristocrats strategy. And Aristocrats? All right, fine.
No,
Aristocrat strategy.
Let's keep doing it. People are going to be so confused by the end of this episode. Like, what is this called?
With the Aristocrat strategy, right? So now you're at the point, okay, you're down to 10 life or 12 life. I'm just sitting here looking good. Maybe I've even gained life through one of the payoffs,
right?
And now I can start swinging through. So I definitely feel
and I like it. It makes the exchange on the battlefield more interesting. It adds a dynamic with choice on board wipes. Mm-hmm. Well, although if you want to take out the threats, obviously, but you're going to pay a price for that choice.
Or you better hope that you maybe have some trample or some flying in if you want to aggro me.
So now I'm going to bring the mood down.
Tell me what the weaknesses are. What's bad about Aristocrats?
It's grindy. And it's also, for me, a positive part of it. Makes it interesting, but it is grindy. It takes a while to get there. It's incremental damage, too slow for the highest power environments. My personal opinion. I think Stu aligns with that idea.
I definitely agree.
It struggles against creature light strategies like control mechanisms and stuff like that. Things that don't care, that aren't it's gonna force them to the Aristocrats player to have to sack and bring back their creatures because they're not gonna be doing the exchange on attack. Perhaps there's no blockers. Was what I'm trying to get at with that idea, right? Creatures in the package are generally smaller. Like a Blood Arse is like a 0/1. Right? A Zilliport, what is that? A 1?
Zilliport Cutthroat's like a 1/1, I think.
Yeah. So that was kind of back to the aggro thing we're talking about. They don't have a really good exchange rate at the end of the day because you're taking up a slot in an aggro package. And I'm saying that that's what you should do, but you could have just done a 2/1 in aggro package too that did a little bit more damage.
Yep.
You're choosing your damage at that point. But,
exactly.
But you're doing it for the technical aspects.
You are, but we've mentioned earlier that, we mentioned earlier about how it can be weak because of those smaller creatures.
Right.
Like, I feel that kind of highlights the technical deck building because you can't just rely on that. Even in the cards that allow you to ping any target rather than a player, you better hope that you got some removal in there because if you haven't been able to get that engine running and someone lands, like a 4/4 or a 6/6 or a flyer, something along those lines, and is hitting you for more than you can suck.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing too about Aristocrats that is a weakness of it, a lot of times it falls short of the total amount of damage to 20 life.
Yep.
And it also falls very short too. And I forgot to put this in here. It really struggles against life gain decks of any kind.
Yes.
Like any kind of extort effects or anything like that. They're taking back all this incremental damage. So in order to seal the deal, you need to have secondary stuff like lightning bolts. And I know I'm going back and forth on environments. So let's just say Banefire type effects.
Yep.
Something to close out that last 3 or 4 that you can't quite get. Because there's a point where these, as we said, the small creatures, I can't attack with my Blood Artist until I put an equipment on it, right? So it's not a viable attacker. I'm really leaning on that creature count. So
and I do like the fact that
it's a struggle for it.
It is, but I've, in the cubes that I've built strategies like this, I've attempted to stay low to the ground. And one of the advantages, if you want to talk about going back a little bit, is that because you're so low to the ground, maybe you can go down a land or 2 ? Depending on how good the fixing is, or maybe you're just monocolor. Maybe you can fit a couple of extra beefy finishes or something in there. But yeah, I agree. Something like a Banefire or a big Alpha Strike finisher can be awesome.
So anybody that's listened to the episode, specifically our good friend David Wilsey, he's pointed out we're not good at lore here at UberCube. I will never claim to have read any of the books. I'm just here for the game and the cards, folks. But I do love the game, and I do appreciate the idea. So I'd like to take the time.
I know nothing about the lore.
I want to educate myself a little bit. So if I got this wrong, feel free, again, blow us up in the Twitters.
Did you research this?
I think I did. It's been a while since I built the script, but we're going to go with it. The idea of the term aristocrat came from, and it's one of these two. I got a 50-50 split here, but these are the first two, and I believe it's actually the second one. But it's going to be the Falconwrath Aristocrat, which is a 4/1 it's 4/1 flying haste, and it's going to cost 2 colorless, 1 swamp, 1 red, and you get a sacrifice a creature. Falconwrath Aristocrat is indestructible this turn. If you sacrificed a creature that was human, put a 1/1 counter on Falconwrath Aristocrat.
A lot of text.
And or Cartel Aristocrat, which is a human advisor for 1 swamp and 1 plains. You get a 2/2. Sacrifice another creature. Cartel Aristocrat gains protection from the color of your choice until the end of the turn. I believe that is the signpost for the name Aristocrats.
I will believe you until I research, and if I find out otherwise, then I'll probably not do anything about it, but just tell you.
Yeah, we always pay our penances here at UberCube. I already screwed up. Yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? They both have the sacrifice effect, and they both have an ability.
And the term aristocrat was introduced.
And the term, obviously, they both have the name.
That's where the introduction came from. Correct, and it became kind of the moniker that became attached to the strategy, and these two played into it.
Look, Falconwrath Aristocrat is a wonderful card.
It's a fantastic
4/1 flying haste for 4 in black red. You can sack a creature to make it indestructible, and if it's a human, you get to beef it up a little bit. Like that's pretty juicy.
This is in my horror cube. I run that, man. That card is amazing.
I think
you sacrifice some humans. It's disgusting.
I think I might play this deck in that cube.
Yeah, dude. Let's get down. All right, so we're gonna move over kind of to our next subset. I'm gonna ask Stu to kind of. What we're gonna do is some of these are gonna be more prevalent, and he's not gonna read the names of those, but some of these are gonna be a little bit less known to the community. So I'm gonna ask, please, could you step through those?
So we're talking about the payoffs. And in some of our other episodes, we've talked about, or certainly one, we talked about sort of splitting the mindset, right? The EDH versus the cube, either when you're drafting or when you're designing a cube. There's a couple of these that will stand out, at least to me, as someone who does play. I have a couple of EDH decks that kind of, utilize and maybe even abuse the mechanic of sacrificing creatures, the aristocrat strategy.
If you wouldn't mind, I'm going to interrupt too, because we are going to kind of zip through some of these.
Yeah.
So the show notes will be made available on our Google Drive that we do share within in the description.
And the Discord, of course.
In the Discord, and I'll have all that. So feel free to join that, and I'll have all this uploaded too. If we blow through these other images, you're unfamiliar, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. So the first one I will talk about is Blood Artist. We mentioned it earlier. Fantastic payoff because not only does the target player lose a life, but you also gain a life, and that can be relevant in any strategy where you're trying to be aggressive, but maybe you understand that there might be a larger creature that you're up against, and maybe you're not able to swing. You're kind of stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place. Like, do I want to swing and maybe leave myself open? When do I want to sack my creatures? So it does give you a little bit of cushion with the life gain.
The weakness of it's a 0/1.
It's a 0/1.
That's the downfall of this
It is
card.
Unfortunate, but you're never going to swing with it.
It's almost like a glorified enchantment doing the thing, right? It's kind of
pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day.
Pretty much. It'd probably be better if it was an enchantment.
Yeah,
It'd be harder
would
to
you mind
remove.
if I'd done this next one? This next one's actually a favorite, because we've kind of talked about in a few moments that there are some of these that, and this is, again, leaning in on my personal opinions. I run all these in some cube. Literally every card we're going to name is pretty much in one of my cubes. But As I said before, Aristocrat struggles in the highest powered. I have a 540 vintage powered cube.
Right.
And this is the only card, unless I see another one come across the lane here, that is actually made that cut and still remains. And it is Judith the Scourge Diva. For 1 colorless, 1 swamp, and 1 red, you get a 2/2. It's a legendary creature, human shaman. Other creatures you control get +1/+0.
Yep.
This is the benchmark as to why she made it. She pushes across that line for that black aggro, or excuse me, the Rakdos aggro type effect that I want to do.
Sure.
And then she has the ancillary payoff of whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target.
I think if you're going to build around Judith, then obviously the non-token aspect
It does hurt her.
needs to be a consideration. And I also feel that the +1/+0, it isn't completely irrelevant. Typically, I wouldn't be as interested in, buffing either power or the toughness
No.
in a sack outlet.
She's the type of card that you'd use as like a grave crawler.
Okay.
Like if you wanted to push him over, he's just a 2/1 for 1 that, comes in the battlefield, but suddenly he becomes a 3/1.
Yes.
On the back. That's where she kind of gives that little bit more of an edge. If you really wanted to push a Rakdos aggro strategy or go to Mardu,
I definitely
in a power
don't
adventure
disagree.
environment, she carries you.
I definitely don't. And one thing I will say is, I sort of was introduced to Cube with the vintage Cube. And
Right.
it was only really when I started to branch out into all the cubes, like the cubes that you have and the cubes that Chris Moore has, Sandwich, who's been on the Pauper episode. You start to really get a benchmark for where, not even just the sweet spot, but what can be sort of the minimum but devastating power level. And I feel that in a lot of these lower powered cube environments, 3 power is just such a pain in the butt to deal with. It smacks your life total down real fast. You're almost always, if you've got any kind of, creature-based strategy, or maybe there's a bit of a setup, you're trying to, swing with an aggro deck, Selesnya, mono green, red, whatever. That 3 power just makes it so difficult to get through, and your life total's going down fast. So I don't disagree with Judith as a solid option.
Yeah, so this next one is going to be something that's going to be more familiar. I'm not going to go through all the stats with this. It's going to be more of the same, but he's a little better in a multiplayer environment. Is Zulaport Cutthroat.
Yes.
Because he gets each opponent.
This, and
He's
again,
my 2-headed giant all-star.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I'll go back and you can compare something like Blood Artist.
Do you want to go Blood Artist versus Zulaport? Because I think that's a damn good book.
It's literally, right? Zulaport Cutthroat versus Blood Artist, right? So you remember what Blood Artist is. Zulaport Cutthroat is a 1/1, and each opponent loses 1 life.
Which fits more in your multiplayer
And it's the
type
same
environments,
cost,
right?
And if you look at the Secret Lair, is it the Secret Lair or the... I think, it was the Secret Lair.
Yeah.
When you've got, this dude, and he's got his foot on the wall and a massive axe that could, chop a dinosaur's head off or something like that. How are you not... Anyway. So this is where I like to sort of draw those parallels between, the Q brain and the EDH brain, right?
Right.
Zulaport Cutthroat deals damage to each opponent. And I, as an EDH deck builder, would never draft a card that targets a player, right?
Right.
This is why I don't play Blood Artist in any of my decks. But it's wonderful in a cube environment where you're typically playing 1v1.
Yeah.
Zulaport Cutthroat, if you might have multiple opponents... in a 2-headed giant cube, or even if you're playing 1-on-1, you're still getting that same effect. You're still getting that ping for a life and
so
gain a
much more
life.
diversity out of it.
Zulaport Cutthroat.
Yeah, multiplayer environments love this guy. He's S tier in terms of this
payoff.
idea. Of
So
payoff.
good.
The next one's going to be, and this one's a little bit more obscure. It's going to be Bastion of Remembrance. For 2 colorless and 1 black, you get an enchantment. And that's kind of what we're kind of pointing at with some of these creatures. When I said that Blood Artist was a 0/1, it was borderline an enchantment until you put a piece of equipment on it.
That's right.
It's kind of what I do like about the Bastion of Remembrance, and I run this in my horror cube environment because, it's got this really great fortress they're standing behind. It's a little gloomy doomy. I know it's from Ikoria, but it was just scary enough to cut the mustard.
Kind of reminds me of...
doesn't look like a great place to live. All right, cool.
Kind of got a Bolus's Citadel.
So when Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white human soldier token. Again, that plays into the horror genre that I'm doing because it's humans versus, right? And then whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And again, that's kind of back to that Zulaport concept. We're in a 1v1 situation, but there are times, and there has been times, we busted out my horror cube and they said, hey, let's rock some 2-headed giant with the horror cube. And I've got vampires, werewolves versus zombies and spirits.
Yep.
I mean, it happens. And this type of card gets a real payoff. So
And
I
it's an
actually enjoy
enchantment.
this, in fact.
Typically, I don't care, unless you are really going heavy on the removal for enchantments. Enchantments are they're much more difficult to remove than creatures, right? So
Correct.
this giving that,
Correct.
that persistent payoff like that is just phenomenal.
Would you mind taking on this next one, please?
Yeah, so this one is this is a newer card, and this is the Meat Hook Massacre. 2 black, an X. It's a legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain a life.
So this one has a strange
Bit of
effect.
a multifaceted. It's got
I like it. You have to pay attention. This one's actually one if you're not keeping your house in your opponent. This is one they'll mess up. Because they just assume that whenever I put this in my Aristocrats type strategy, it's going to play the same. This one has unique play lines. You have to. I'm calling you out here, Stu. I'm going to be watching, and Kevin, specifically Kevin, will definitely try to pain his opponents every time.
Please don't put me on a pedestal. I am not a good Magic player.
But this card's actually been fantastic in my horror cube, which is a high powered but not power 9 type level cube, right? Like I'm running Force of Wills, which we'll talk about later in another episode, but I'm also, toned down. I'm not running any of the mana crypts and things like that.
I mean, this card is cool. One thing I'll say, it's a cool, from a design perspective, I think this card is absolutely phenomenal. It's a board wipe and then it persists and you get this effect, which is pretty awesome. And not to mention, again, it's an enchantment, so it's kind of a pain in the butt to remove. And I'm always a fan of anything. There's a reason why Toxic Deluge is so absurdly powerful as a board board sweeper, even though, sure, you got to pay some life, but it's 3 mana and you get to get around the indestructible and you can kind of figure, you know what, I've got some 4/4s, some 5/5s. I just want to get rid of these 1/1s and 2/2s. Gives you that control. So this is there's a reason. This is not a cheap card for a reason.
Yeah, and the next one, we're not going to go into it extensively, but it's Falkenrath Noble. You know what? Whatever, I'll go through it because these are kind of the key integral pieces and they're going to move around. So I will take the time to read them, okay?
Sure.
So Falkenrath Noble is for 3 colorless, one swamp. You get a creature vampire, 2/2 flyer. Whenever Falkenrath Noble or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, on rate for a 2/2 flyer, this is not the best. But in order to get the density to signify that I had in my horror cube, which is 360, I needed to run just a nice round group because I'm not running Zulaport.
This card is essential, and I'll tell you why. Right, in my opinion, it's a flyer. Yeah, it's a 2/2. A creature that has evasion after you've tried to get out aggro early with all your shenanigans of sacking creatures and maybe gaining some life and doing some damage. If you just need that one threat that can push you over the edge that's hard for your opponent to get rid of, this is it. It's got that extra point of damage over some of the other creatures. It's a flyer. It's 4 CMC. It's more expensive, but it's a finisher.
In that particular environment, I run a lot of utility lords or anthem lords. Not a lot of those based on. If you listen to our Fey Cube episode where we talked to Magic, we talked about how lords can be a trap.
Shout out to May. Wonderful episode.
Yeah, I have in fact though run a lot of utility lords that make something like that. It's just a 2/2 that doesn't look so intimidating. It can get a lot worse. I mean, it can get a lot of payoffs in that environment. So we're gonna kind of move over to these other ones, and they're kind of gonna fall into the same vein.
A little more fringe, though.
Yeah, but I do run this in my horror cube, too. It's going to be Spiteful Prankster. For 1 mountain, 2 colors, you get a 3/2. As long as your turn, Spiteful Prankster has first strike. Whenever another creature dies, Spiteful Prankster deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. I run this in my horror cube, and I do believe that Samich also runs this in his uncommon cube, his peasant cube as well, because it is an uncommon, and it's a pretty good little beater.
It's insane.
It's a good little beater.
It's a 3/2. It hits that 3 power sweet spot.
First strike is powerful.
It has first strike, and it has that effect. What is the not to love about this card?
Yeah, so I mean, this card's fantastic, and then it's a devil literally burning a dove on top of a roof. I mean, this if you haven't checked out this art, by the way, and we'll have this in the show notes, this art is sick. It's super cool. It's borderline disturbing. He's burning pigeons and he's tossing them down for fireballs. So I don't got much to say about that. All right, the next one is Cruel Celebrant. Stu, would you mind covering that one?
Yeah, 1 white, 1 black. Yeah, I think this is another fairly staple. Doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. For a 1/2 vampire, whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. A little bit more difficult with the 2 different pips, 1 white, 1 black. But it is Orzhov, but it gets that again.
I do run this in my horror cube as well, and my Loft of Femme Fatale
has the dual effect.
Yeah,
again, going back has the dual effect, and I've talked about this. I'll talk about it in this episode. I've talked about it in previous episodes. Right. multiple effects. Just an opponent losing a life, that's nice.
Right.
But having that dual effect of the loss of life for OP, gaining a life yourself, I'm all about it.
And what I do like about that, and it's throwing us out to the community, and I don't know if a lot of people have done this, but I will encourage people, if you take your cube that may not be a two-headed giant cube, and sometimes because we all struggle to get enough drafters sometimes.
Yep.
It's a plague we all deal with. 8 players is a nightmare. We always get 7. We always get 5.5.
7.
You get the one.
When the hell do we get 7?
Well,
it's normally
we get
5
we get
or
6
4.
We get 6 if we're lucky. But 2 at a giant cube, you can actually do that with a lot of environments, and then run that, and even jank ones. These type of effects, suddenly you can even sideboard these in, and they make make your cards kind of come alive for 2 at a giant effects.
Yep.
This next one is more of, again, it's a peasant card. It's Mayhem Devil. And for 1 colorless, 1 black, and 1 mountain, you get a devil. It's a 3/3. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. I do not run this currently in my horror cube, only because I've run out of space and I don't want to oversaturate my guilds. But I do know a lot of players run this in their peasant cubes. I run this in my tome-bound EDH cube because I sacrifice my treasures that I make with tome-bound.
Yeah.
This card's actually a must-kill on side.
And we actually talked about some of the pushed mechanics recently.
Right.
There was this is 2022. Treasures have all of a sudden become like flavor of the month.
Sure.
There's a lot of players sacking treasures. There's even some very, very powerful cards that really care about treasures. All of a sudden, someone's sacking 3 or 4 treasures because they want us to cast a spell. Now you've got a 7/7 that you've only paid 3 mana for. And again, yes, this doesn't give life, right?
It does not.
But you know what it does? It does the 1 damage to any target.
And the keyword is permanent for this particular card. So if anybody's out there even just listening for Commander, anything, right? I mean, It's kind of a gross card, but if you're running those, because you can run fetch lands in lower powered environments. I mean, I do.
I run them in as many decks as I can.
I run them in my horror cube because some people want a higher tempo. So I slow down the actual play style, but I don't want to punish the players with their mana, if that makes sense.
Hey, look, I hear you on the fetch lands. I run the Mirage fetch lands in a few of my decks. I don't think there's anything right. I think they're great.
I love
them. I think they add a very, very solid budget, redundant way to fix your mana, especially with. So again, this is 2022. It's August. We're looking at the newest spoilers for Dominaria United.
Did you see those?
Or now we're seeing lands. They've got both basic super types or subtypes or whatever the heck it is, but they enter tapped. It's unfortunate.
I don't care.
Who cares? I don't Absolutely, I don't care. If I want to spend $30 or $20 or $50 even on a deck, I'm putting those bad boys in and those Mirage fetches.
And if you're running budget cubes, I mean,
budget cube, absolutely. And are they uncommon or common?
They're common.
They might be common. You might be right.
We'll work that out.
Common.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
They are common.
Unfortunately, the onslaught fetch lands are uncommon, else Pauper guys would probably be going insane here. But
all right, peasant guys, rejoice.
Peasant peeps, rejoice. All right, the next one we're going to go over, and we've totally went off on this really cool, because we've gotten spoilers out here in the world, because we can't help to. I don't know if everybody else has been paying attention to their computer screens, but we have here at UberCube. But the next one is Sir Conrad the Grim.
And I love me some Sir Conrad.
Stu, I can't take this away.
I do like this card because I have a Slimefoot deck that I play this card in. It's pretty awesome. So Sir Conrad the Grim, it's a legendary creature, human knight, 3 colorless, 2 black. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. This is definitely not your typical sack creature.
It's not, but if you're running like a graveyard synergy cube or something I did put this in my horror cube for a minute and a half, but it always comes down to it didn't have any evasion for me. It's a 5 slot.
It's still got that whenever another creature dies.
It does.
You still get the effect, and it still deals 1 damage.
If you wanted to top in for your Aristocrats package, this is a very powerful top in and graveyard.
I agree, and sometimes, regardless of how low to the ground you're trying to be,
right,
you want a top end. You just want something that can swing for a good pile of damage.
Yeah.
That has some sustainability. It's got 4 toughness.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to play this as a top end? It sounds good. And
I was just competing in my particular, because my horror cube environment is what focuses mostly on Aristocrats, is my core element. My 2-headed giant carries it, but I have to be what we talked about before, the 2-headed giant, because it all doubles, I have to be more choice in that environment. I don't want to saturate too many of them because it would be punishing to sit there and have all these going off. So I run it, but like we said before, the UberCubeCrats, and we'll talk about that later. But in my horror cube, I really pushed it. It's just, it starts competing at that 5-drop spot. And there's just better stuff in there with that type of. The next one this one's a little bit weirder. It's not kind of more the same. It's Vindictive Vampire. There's not a whole lot to say about it. It's a 2/3. It costs 4. Kind of does more of the same. It's each opponent. If you haven't caught on the theme here,
has the dual effect.
There's 2 dividing lines. Or there's 3. Let me be clear. On all the cards we're going to cover, and there's going to be one more. Is either they're doing it to a single opponent, and they're losing a life, you're gaining a life, or it's doing it to all opponents. They're losing a life, gaining a life. Or we've got the weird one, Meat Hook Massacre. We know that one's the unusual one.
And you've got the target opponent.
And then you've got the target opponent singular damage.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the theme here. And you can kind of pick through these and choose based on your environment's power level, strategies, and what you want to do, and how heavy you want to saturate these. But it does come at a cost. Their power levels are typically smaller. This next one's actually interesting and cute. I ran this last night in Sandwich's Popper Cube. It's the Hissing Guanar. That's the one I bumbled on earlier, excuse me.
You got it perfect that time.
Because I'm reading it. And it's a lizard that's 3/1. Whenever another creature is put into a graveyard from play, you may have Hissing Guanar do 1 damage to target player. Again, not really the Aristocrats. You're not getting a life off of it. It's just targeted incremental damage. And that kind of wraps up the huge subgroup of the things, and I'm sure we have missed some. I mean, it's impossible to cover them all.
I'm sure we have.
There's a Golgari.
We do that on purpose. We want to get the conversation going again. We'll talk about the socials at the end, but I feel like this is such a popular strategy, such a popular archetype that I think we can get some discussion going.
So the next piece, and we're going to most of these we're going to cut through them pretty quick. I'm going to ask Stu, you mind jamming through some of the sack fodder section?
Yeah. So typically these are going to be either creatures or some kind of effect that allows you to generate the sack fodder, right? Generate the creatures. So things like Ophiomancer, 3 CMC, Human Shaman, 2/2. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, you create a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch. Bitter Blossom. Don't need to read that card. You're getting a 1/1 black fairy creature token every upkeep. Bloodghast. Right?
Yep.
Comes back from the battlefield, which is awesome if you can sack it, play a land.
We talked about this in our Land Matters. We talked about this in our Stacks episode. If you haven't heard this,
has haste if your opponent has less than 10 life. Swing it for damage. Yeah. Great card. Reassembling Skeleton. We brought this up before.
Slower but thematic.
Definitely
if you have it toned down, because it's a 1/1, but it really doesn't have a purpose other than being sacked. That's what I do like about this card. It knows its purpose in life.
It's a house.
It's obnoxious.
It's a house. You don't have to. There's no other sort of weird thing that you have to do. You don't have to sacrifice another creature to bring it back or anything like that, right? It's just 1 color, 1 black. Bring it back straight to the battlefield. It's tapped. Oh well, who cares? I'm probably going to sacrifice it again anyway.
That Popper edition that I was bumbling over earlier, it was some kind of experiment or whatever. We'll look that one up later, but that was the one that I was doing with the
Nantuko Husk effect or whatever. Yeah. It wasn't that card, but something like that.
Yeah. Gutter Bones kind of does the same thing. That's another one of those creatures. It's an aggro beater, but it also can be returned from your graveyard.
And I will say, Gutter Bones, again, we talked about sort of the cross-pollination in the aggro strategies. This is one that I feel is a really good enabler for that, right? It enters tapped, who cares? You're not attacking turn 1 anyway, but to get a 2/1 on turn 1 and to be able to swing maybe 2, maybe 3 times, depending on the power of the environment.
This one has an interesting, the way it reads too with Aristocrats is, in Gutter Bones, for people who aren't familiar, it's 1 swamp, you get a Skeleton Warrior, 2/1. Okay, we remove that. Enters the battlefield tap. Doesn't matter. What goes really well with Aristocrats is for 1 colorless and 1 black, you get return Gutter Bones from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only during your turn and only if an opponent lost life this turn. Not a hard thing to do since you just sacrificed it.
That's right.
And you can just bring it back.
And you know what it doesn't say? Yeah, it doesn't say once.
Correct.
There's no stipulation on you can only do this once. Correct. You can keep doing this.
You can abuse this card
as many times as you like.
Yeah, as much as mana as you have to spend, you can abuse it. Some of these other ones it's Lingering Souls because it makes tokens. Dread Horde Invasion is actually an interesting one because at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and you amass 1. If you're not familiar with it, is you put a 1/1 counter on an army you control. If you don't control 1, create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first. The rest of the text doesn't matter. The point of this one is it just kind of keeps making regenerating fodder.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, if you've got any kind of effect that allows you to not just ping your opponent, but also gain a life, then the incremental loss of life from Dreadhorde Invasion is irrelevant. Right. But you're getting that constant sack fodder every single upkeep of yours. That's awesome. Your end.
Yeah. Midnight Haunting, I mean, it's just mixed spirits. And these are things like, and when you would aristocrat these out, it's whenever the flyers and the attackers are no longer viable. It's back to that argument we made about
the cross-pollination and supplementing those strategies.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we can't go through an entire episode without me not wanting to talk about a squirrel. So I put Nested Shambler in here, which is not in my horror
It's a reach, because it's not even a squirrel.
It's going to make them. So for 1 black, you get a 1/1 zombie. When Nested Shambler dies, create X tapped 1/1 green squirrels. Creature tokens where X is Nested Shambler's power. So I'm going to want to put a Bone Splitter on this guy. Probably just let him die so I can get me some squirrels. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'll sack those too.
I don't know. It is, but I don't know why it's telling me that home is where the heart is, or what it's got to do with squirrels, or is it because it's a nest?
No, the squirrels are going into his chest cavity. That is where his heart used to be. I don't know what's going on here. It's odd. It's disturbing. Check out this art.
Right. Thank you for giving me nightmares.
Yeah, we're gonna have nightmares.
Anyway, so let's move on to
how do we get rid of those little dorks?
Well, we need these sack outlets.
Yeah, there we go.
So let's talk about the first one. Anthony, you take this one, because this one, I don't think this needs a whole lot of introduction. Great card.
This card's amazing. It's Yawgmoth, Thran Physician for 2 colorless and 2 black. You get a 2/4 legendary creature, Human Cleric. Protection from humans, which means he is super antisocial. Pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a -1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature, and draw a card. That's kind of the Aristocrat sack piece. The next one is pay 2 swamps, discard a card, proliferate. So it also fills your graveyard for your animator. This card's bonkers. I don't currently running it. I tested it out in my Powered Vintage environment.
I don't think it's good enough.
It didn't get there, but I wanted it to be, because I mean, this card literally has so much text and does so much. For me, in my personal opinion, it's a lower powered environment, or it's specifically like a commander card.
It's a really fun EDH
broken commander card. It's
super
not
fun EDH
It's not fun. You can just take black planeswalkers and break them. Please don't do that, audience. This guy is busted.
It's gross. I don't think it's busted.
It is an EDH. Yeah, it is. I've played against it. It's miserable. But moving on to the next one, we got stuff like Goblin Bombardment, which is going to be sacrifice creature, do 1 damage. It's more of the same. Like, you're going to hit them, and then you're going to hit them with the Aristocrat.
Yep.
Carrion Feeder is like an integral piece to a lot of these ideas, right? He's very powerful, or it's very powerful, excuse me, because I have no idea what that is. Completely skinned.
Very powerful.
It's very powerful. Carrion Feeder can't block, kind of the downside, but it's just basically a free sack outlet that gets incrementally bigger. You got stuff like Woe Strider. You got Yahini, the Undying Partisan.
Got Eternal Bond too. We got a bunch of these creatures that they have these, like, it's not just I'm going to sit there as a 0/1 and, hope that I survive long enough for, whatever the payoff and the sack outlet, or the other payoff or the sack outlet's going to do. But, I've got, additional effects, right? I'm either a big creature, or I get bigger, or, I'm going to allow you to draw cards. So there's all these cool, like, extra stuff.
What I like about him,
I love Yahini.
What I like about Yahini, Undying Partisan, the legendary creature Etherborn Vampire for 2 colorless and 1 black. You get a 2/2 haste creature. Whenever a creature an opponent control dies, put a 1/1 counter on Yahini, Undying Partisan. What's really neat about this one, as far as the sack stuff, and I run this in my artifact cube as an enabler, is sacrifice another creature. Yahini gains indestructible to end the turn. So it kind of gives you a little bit of the sacrifice outlet, but it also gets a payoff whenever their creatures are dying. It just gives you a lot of directions to go. I like this card a lot.
It's a 2/2 haste. As well. It can swing for some damage. You can swing it and sacrifice, your fodder and make it difficult. It creates questions for your opponent, right? Do you want to block it with a big creature and maybe risk some other kind of an effect, or do you want to just chump block it? Do you just want to let the damage through? It's a bit of a stumper.
And God Eternal Bond too. Not going to go in that card extensively, but it's the reason why I mentioned that one. It's actually my Femme Fatale cube, because we talked about it on the previous episode. It's actually female. which is interesting. And it's 5-6 minutes that does a thing. It sacrifices a bunch of creatures within the battlefield.
That's going to win the game by itself.
It's powerful all by itself, but it just allows you, whenever it enters in, to get rid of all those sack outlets that you're trying to bomb, and then all your Aristocrats go off at the same time.
I feel like
all these payoffs.
I feel like at 5 mana, that should be really towards the top end for
in this particular one.
I think it's a great card, a lot of text. Menace is always a bit of a pain in the butt because now you got to block it with 2 creatures, and it has 5 power and 6 toughness, so definitely another one of the finishers for that.
Let's talk about a card that is in fact broken, that got printed whenever everybody thought you couldn't break a card more, and it was Village Rites, which has probably, in this newest printing from Kaldheim, I need to pick up a copy, the most metal picture you've ever seen in your life from my Munson Cube.
It's metal,
but it is for 1 swamp. It is an instant. At the additional cost, cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards.
Now you're getting your hand refilled. You've got your sack. Absolutely
instant
wonderful
speed,
stuff.
Insanity. This card is busted. Do I run this in the highest powered environments? Absolutely not.
No.
But I will run this in my lower powered stuff for a nice little payoff to get those Aristocrats ticking along. Bone Shards. The art's disgusting. I don't know what's happening in this. I don't know what's going on in this picture.
It's like some interview with the vampire. Like nonsense. Flying bones and
who knows what's happening in this picture.
Blood and whale blubber or whatever the heck that is. And
I think when we walked into this,
it looks kind of a little bit like Lane Staley there with his arms like outstretched.
And what I like about this card, and it's kind of compared to Village Rites a little bit, is for 1 swamp you get a sorcery, so it's toned back, but it has to be. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, or discard a card. Set up your reanimator.
Choices.
Destroy target creature or planeswalker. I do, in fact, run this in my powered vintage environment. This is nice, clean reanimator setup. Deal with Jace the Mind.
It's good against Emrakul.
Kills Oko.
Emrakul Promised End?
Yeah, because it's instant.
Because it's protection from instance?
Yeah. It's a powerful card, but I think by the time that's happening, you've went a little further in the field. Then you got stuff like Viscera.
Viscera, sack a creature, scry one. So, I feel like this can be more in the, I'm going to build an Aristocrats deck with some really hyper-focused high end that I want to get to, right? Say, and it's great. Like anytime you can scry and kind of, sculpt your hand a little bit is great. But I like cards like this if I'm really either digging towards a big, huge payoff card or, big creature, and I want to swing through for big damage.
Or
then maybe this can be
amidst the board wipe. Decent. This is what people will do in the board wipe.
Just sack all of your creatures.
All of them, get
scry like crazy.
Find your solution. The next one we're going to talk about is going to be some of these artifacts that we're going to talk about. They're going to be your Ashnod altars, your Altar of Dementia, your Phyrexian altar, and we'll throw in Phyrexian Tower as a land. That all of these are going to be supplemental pieces that you can run within your colorless, or in the case of Phyrexian, you can do that too, I guess. You can run these in your colorless section if you really want to push these things, and you can also do some pretty broken combos.
I was going to say, I don't think Ashnod's altar and Phyrexian altar need a whole lot of introduction. They are, especially in my opinion, maybe. I don't know if there'd be any disagreement on whether people think that Ashnod's altar or Phyrexian altar is kind of the more broken. One of them you get any color, one of them you get Sol, you get the 2 colors. Me personally, I think Ashnod's altar is absolutely disgusting. I love it.
Slapped in it's the Gravecrawler, Phyrexian altar, Liliana Flagbearers combos in my horror cube.
So
now that I've told you, now that I have told you, it is there. Yes. Then we've got some other cards that are going to be kind of the so at this point, I just want to kind of recap. We've shown you the cards that do the thing, the Aristocrats or Aristo-Kats. So that was your Blood Artist versus Zulu Port type of...
The enablers.
Yeah, those were kind of the 2 different areas that we span across. Then we went over the creatures or the fodder, the things that get out there, and all their holy purpose in life mostly
is to die.
And then you had to have a thing that made them die. So that was kind of your sacked outlets, quote unquote, and whether it was a creature or an artifact or an enchantment, whatever it is, you needed something to take it off the field, but you can't depend on Battlefield Exchange or really hope and cross your fingers that maybe they'll board wipe and deal with this problem. You have to have something. So it's kind of your 3 major pieces is that part. Well, the next one is, well, I'm doing all this and I'm really trying to deplete your life total incrementally and, gain mine. Well, what is in it for me besides that? So we've got interesting cards that you can supplement in there, such as Midnight Reaper. I run this in my hard cube. The card's pretty nutty. For 1 swamp and 2 colors, you get a 3/2. It is a zombie knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you, and you draw a card.
Yeah, and this got some really cool, like, Dark Soulsy kind of art about it as well.
I need to put this in my metal cube. I forgot. This is on my list. Munson Cube.
I feel like you should.
I'll put the link up there. I've got 180 Jund, just pure metal. We talked about it in a previous episode. Got to listen to Pantera. Got to listen to Meshuggah. You got to drink a little bit of whiskey.
Hey, Meshuggah, now you're talking.
Yeah. A little bit Joro. Yeah, it's good stuff. But anyways, yeah, I'll put that up in the show notes. It's fun. Would you mind taking on this next one, please?
Yeah. So again, similar kind of effect to Midnight Reaper, except you don't take the damage. Whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card for Morbid Opportunist. Again, 2 colorless, 1 black. You get a 1/3 rather than a 3/2. Midnight Reaper deals the damage, but Morbid Opportunist only triggers once a turn.
Yeah, so it's for slower environments. It's not ideal, but you can get it's a payoff. I run it in my left end Fatale Cube because it's 1/3 stats on it. Kind of want to have something to shut down my aggro package, and also got a little bit of a payoff, even though it's once per turn. I'll take one over none.
It's a redundant effect. I think in a vacuum, I like Midnight Reaper better because it swings for 3. The 1 damage I'm not too worried about, especially if I've got a payoff or one of the effects that allows me to gain life whenever I'm sacking creatures. And the card draw is not limited to once per turn.
The major distinction is the rarity levels. A lot of people put set. That is why it's restrictions.
Exactly. Yeah, Midnight Reaper is a rare
one's peasant and one's not. Where I don't put any. The only restriction I have in my horror environment must be scary, and my metal environment must be metal as AF. Well, and a peasant cube has to be uncommon or common, right? So people they follow. We set rules as curators. We make life difficult on our own selves.
That's the fun. Right?
That is what makes it fun. Actually, yeah. It makes it more interesting for your players and all that too. And then I got one more that I can't not talk about. It's very EDH-y, but it'll be kind of our last one. Is Priest of the Forgotten Gods. I run this in my left end Fatale Cube. I like this card a lot. I'm going to acknowledge it's not the best, but also that environment is slower paced. And if I'm toning it back, it's okay. It's a strong effect.
I will disagree.
Yeah.
I actually think it is more than cube worthy.
I think so too.
More so. Like, you did.
I took a defensive posture.
You did, but I kind of feel that you're almost justifying it to yourself.
I was.
That you was in there. And
Thank you.
I honestly don't think you need to do that. You're sacrificing 2 creatures
Is our
untapped.
session over, Doctor?
Yes. Why don't you take a lie down on my shades lounge over there? It's all right. So it's 2 mana. You do have to tap it, and you do have to sacrifice 2 other creatures, right? So any number of target players in Cube, it's typically going to be 1, which is your opponent, but they do lose 2 life, right? So now you're getting, and if heaven forbid, you would have like a Blood Artist or a Zulaport Cutthroat on the battlefield, now things are getting real spicy.
Or Judith.
As well as they have to sacrifice a creature, as well as you add 2 black.
Yeah.
As well as you draw a card.
Yeah, it's powerful.
This is a lot of effects. Yes, you have to tap it.
Yeah.
It's not just instant speed for nothing. Yes, it's 2 creatures, but that is a lot of effects, especially for a creature that only costs 2 mana to come in, is a 1/2, so has isn't just a 0/1 or a 1/1 or some of the other payoffs. I dig the heck out of this card.
I like it too. I took the defensive posture only because I thought you were going to browbeat me to death on it. I do run it in my left end Fatale.
You make good choices
from
time to time.
All right. So this next one, we've got 2 new cards that we want to talk about. They're fresh from Dominaria, right?
Yes. Dominaria United coming soon.
Yeah. And these are both cards that I thought would be ideal to talk about in the said Aristocrats type of archetype that we're designing here. And as you've noticed during this episode, this curation that he and I have done, we haven't focused on anything in particular, not a particular like vintage or power level or thematic. That's because Aristocrats is
other than it doesn't really have the power for vintage.
It does not.
So I think any kind of theme or color specific, absolutely.
You could push it. I mean, I tried it. I failed. How about that? We'll leave it right there. We'll just put that. We'll put a pin in that. But if you're pushing this in your powered level vintage environment, no shame in the game, because it could definitely get it done. It's just I failed. I failed.
But you didn't fail. You just learned.
I just learned.
It's a learning.
There is always
experience.
Learning, not failing.
Exactly.
All right. You make your own weather.
Can you make it
No, you cannot.
full yet? No,
I cannot. All right, so the next one, I'll take on this first one, and Stu, you can grab the next one, even though the other one's way cooler that I'm going to give Stu, but that's cool.
Thank you.
All right, so this first one is, and everybody, we talked about this really amazing steampunk, creepy young lady hanging out in the graveyard before. Well, she's back. Guess who's back? Braids is back.
Without the goggles.
Which I kind of miss, frankly.
I miss the
Braids,
goggles.
the Arisen Nightmare. For 1 colorless and 2 swamps, you get a legendary creature, Nightmare. Not Braids. Also a little sad here. You get a 3/3. She used to be a minion, right? She was previously a minion, yes. So she's now moved on. All right. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, a creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. I said that really slowly. Don't know why. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. I like this one because I'm not going to run this in my Powered Vintage environment. I am going to do this based on the La Femme Fatale, which focuses on females in the particular art class, right? But I don't think it's the highest power level, but I do like what this card could do. I think it's going to make some waves into Commander, especially. I thought it was cool.
I would be quite happy to turn 1 swamp into Dark Ritual into Braids.
I would not be. Yeah, that would be pretty sick, actually. Yeah. You start getting some card draw engine at that point, right? And they lose life.
Do you need a card draw? I'm just going to play a land and sack my land and hope that you don't have a 1-drop. And if you do, I'm going to maybe hope that I can sneak a creature out somehow and then sack my creature at the end step. And now you have to sack yours.
I'm very curious to see if this card makes it in some Powered Vintage lists.
I don't think it will. I don't think it's strong enough for that.
I don't think I'm going to test it, but I'm definitely going to put it into my lower powered environment.
I think the Horror Cube, it must go in.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
100%.
Let's talk about the next one. Stu, would you mind taking this one's badass, by the way?
Yes, this is badass. All right, this is definitely... I'm kind of surprised on the creature type. So it's Lagomos, Hand of Hatred, 1 colorless, 1 black, 1 red. You get a legendary creature, Human Shaman. It's kind of got a vampire kind of look in the
first
art.
thing this thing made me think about was Mystery Science Theater, the Hands of Mantos.
What is with you and Mystery Science
Theater? It was such a bad film.
You're getting to the point where you're going to have to make a reference to that like every episode.
I'll make you watch this film.
Anyway, so you get a, like I say, legendary creature, Human Shaman. It's a 1/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste, which is sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. You may tap Lagomos. I really kind of wish he had haste. You may tap him.
That would be broken.
Or her. You may tap Lagomos. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So you get a demonic tutor, except you can only do that if 5 or more creatures die.
Yeah, I like it more for the rate. I like the 2/1 that it's shoving out, and
it's 5 creatures.
Yeah,
but you sacrifice them.
Yeah, you can do some nutty stuff with this though.
I kind of feel
people are going to break this. I assure you.
You know what I wish? I kind of wish that they'd have overcosted this at like 5 or 6 mana.
Yes.
Instead of a 2/1 with trample and haste, just make it like a 1/1.
Yeah.
Right? And make them persist. Don't make you have to sacrifice them.
A 1/1 with persist doesn't make any sense.
No, just a 1/1.
Oh, okay.
Not literally with persist. I should choose my words carefully, right? Because persist is a mechanic. But no, one that just stays on the battlefield. It's just a 1/1 that you create, and then you can tap and sack 5 creatures, or you can tap, or you can. I'm sorry. Then you can sack 5 creatures somehow, maybe with one of your outlets, and search for a card. Is that super powerful?
No,
I actually don't think it is. But you know what it is? It's kind of fun, and I think it would be cool.
So these aren't going to be Powered Vintage for me personally. No. But what these are thematic cubes, man. That's where I'm going to be jamming these. I mean, I can tell you 100% that Braids is going to go in my fam. I'm going to probably
horror stuff, right? Yeah.
And then look, I'm going to debate on him as well.
Lagomos is horror.
Lagomos is metal, is what he's definitely in the Munson Cube. It's happening. We'll figure out the rest of them.
He's horror.
Right. So this has been kind of a fun episode. We realize there's a lot of parts and pieces, but to kind of reiterate for people who, if anybody's new to the cube idea and they want to get into this idea, as far as the Aristocrat strategy is a fun technical aspect type of cube curation and build that you can do. And what you're going to have is you're going to have your Aristocrats, and we defined those earlier on. Those are going to be your pieces. They're going to exchange life totals when things happen, death. And then we're going to have the creatures or components that are going to run for their deaths, and they're going to die. And then in order to have that done, we're going to trigger those with sack outlets or hope battlefield exchange happens. And those 3 components is how you get an Aristocrats deck, which is to me, fundamentally, one of my favorites. I mean, I literally played it again last night. Can't stop doing it. Talked about this before in the Popper episode. And Chris Moore, or a.k.a.
You did that because you got Pestilence.
I did, and we talked about Pestilence.
Let's talk about Pestilence. We're not talking about Pestilence. It might be a little bit on the powerful side for a pauper environment.
Might be a little bit on the sore side for a certain curator right now. Too soon. He's got to let it go.
You know what?
Let it drift out to the ocean like Wilson.
I think it's a great test. Whether or not it ends up staying out of the pauper cube, maybe it's something that ends up coming back. Maybe you sort of finagle around with some of your other archetypes in order to be able to deal with it. But
no, it's too powerful.
All right, sure.
It's structured too powerful. All right, so we're going to move over kind of to our closing thoughts on this one.
It's grindy.
It's like grindy. We talked about that. Like it's something that, the grindy is not a negative. It's a positive. Certainly it's a pro and a con, right? It depends on your stance. It's bad if you're in the fast environments. It's fun as hell if you're in the slower environment.
It can be pretty controlly in a very creature-heavy cube as well, because you've got those payoffs that allow you to either choose your target rather than like each opponent or target player, right? If it's any target and you can start pinging some little creatures,
Yeah, and if you haven't picked it up from now from just the tone that Stu and I've had this, it's a fan favorite.
Yes.
And it's hard to not get people to like this. It's an interesting strategy. It creates, you have diversity in the environment. You can pick and choose. You can do all kinds of archetypes with it. It's very dynamic in what it's capable of. And it can be onesies and twosies. You don't have to go full in.
Yep.
It's an interesting kind of effect.
And I think there's enough, I don't know about like eternal 60 card formats or rotating 60 card formats, but I can certainly say that in Commander, which is almost certainly the most popular format at this point, there's plenty of commanders that are really fun in this environment, in this strategy, right? In Aristocrats. So being able to integrate this into a cube, not only is it fun and it's familiar, or maybe it's fun and it's familiar, right? So, someone's asking you, maybe they're not familiar with playing cube. You can say, hey, there's an Aristocrat strategy. Okay, cool. Like I'm familiar with that. It's a more technical. You're not like bringing in someone who might be, familiar with Magic, but then you're like, hey, we've got Storm or some of these really super complex strategies, a little more scary.
Aristocrats is like, great to kind of bring
it's into complex, but it gives you like almost an entry level, more complex deck building, a lot of choices.
And like we said, it can go in popper cubes, peasant cubes, thematic cubes,
exactly,
unpowered high tier cubes will run this. And so it scales so well with those, so you can get a lot of exposure, especially as a new player. And as far as curating goes, it's actually kind of cool to curate it because the art's gorgeous on most of these.
Yes.
They're fun, they're exciting cards to put in. It's neat to see how you can organically try to put this into your cube. And taking the slots can be a little hard, so you have to make some really critical choices as a curator.
Agreed.
Like, what's your trade-off? Do I want to put a 0/1 Blood Artist in, exchange it for just a dumb old 2/1 attacker for 1, but it still creates like this diversity so that you don't have such a vanilla linear style of play. I like it. It doesn't track that way.
Yep, agreed.
Other than that, I'm going to ask Stu.
That was fun.
Pretty pleased.
It was great.
It's a fun topic.
I'm glad we did. I like the fun topics, right? I like the archetypes that are going to resonate because they're not just popular in Cube, or we're not just being hyper focused about this is the kind of episode that I really enjoy recording.
I do as well, because we can talk about because here at UberCube we don't focus on a particular type of cube. We're all over the place.
We can talk about,
and
especially strategies like this. You can bring pet cards into it. Actually, one that we didn't mention was Pitiless Plunderer, which kind of came to me.
Pitiless Plunderer is amazing.
Yeah,
let's cover that one real quick. It's important.
So Pitiless Plunderer. It is a 4 CMC, 3 colorless, 1 black for a 1/4 human pirate. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact. And again, don't really need
and
to.
And like a $15 uncommon. I got
bananas. I don't think I paid.
I know it's the 4 mana value slot, but my artifact cube I'm really considering, because it does say another creature. It doesn't say non-token. So
exactly.
I really need to put this in just for a payoff for some of those other things I'm doing, because I've got a lot of sack outlets and ATOG type effects.
Yep.
This could really be pretty devastating. I'm ordering one tonight. I want to get outside. Other than that, this has been, like Stu said, fun episode.
Super fun.
I mean, I enjoy this topic. It's one of my favorite type of archetypes.
I like any kind of archetype discussion.
I will run this in any cube. If I see some kind of Aristocrat signpost, I will try to jam it. Stu, would you mind taking us out to the socials, please?
All right. So as always, love hearing from the community, love all the interaction and the discussion that we've seen on the socials regarding either our episodes or, other people's cubes that they've talked about. It's been really, really awesome. Please reach out to us on Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. We are also available via email at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And actually, we want to give a shout out to someone who reached out to us. And this was regarding a discussion that we had on Twitter regarding the triomes.
Yeah,
Anthony?
I was apprehensive about triomes, and I want to thank Preston Laska. And I apologize.
Shout out, Preston.
And I apologize if I butchered that name, but I want to specifically thank this listener because they sent me an email that made such a vivid case, just clear. There was no way out of my argument after reading such a well-written, well-crafted email.
I want to thank Preston because he just told me that I was right.
And I want to tell you,
thanks, Preston.
And I also want to say, thanks for making Stu right, Preston. But so we wanted to thank our listeners, right? I mean, I wanted to say a special thank you. Thanks for listening and for just the amazing feedback. Great write-up.
Yes,
just truly great.
It was such a nice.
We've got
email.
other people in our group that have actually read this as well, and they're actually. I think you got us on the Triumph train now. So wanted to tell you thanks, Preston.
Good. Thanks, Preston.
Yeah.
And we always mention we have our Discord, that we got links on the socials, on Twitter. Please feel free, drop by, come say hi, hang out. We do post some notes in there about the episodes, as well as discussion about Anthony's cubes and any other cubes that that you're interested in chatting about. We'd love to hear from
Getting
you.
a little
and hang
interesting
out.
active group in there. We're starting to chat it up.
Absolutely. And sort of second but last but not least, if you will, I will say once again, thank you so much to all the listeners, and we really do appreciate not just you guys dropping by and hanging out with us, but if you really like the content, which we hope that you do, feel free, give us a 5-star review and drop a comment on whatever your chosen podcast media and application might be. We really appreciate it ourselves, and helps get the content out there to other people that are either cube enthusiasts now or maybe the next generation of
I also
cube
want to do the peddling. I made the Disney Robin Hood episode. I talked about the movie early on, Little John, and all that. There's a particular scene. It's like arms for the paw. So, anyways, this is the we've got a Patreon, and it's UberCube at Patreon, and you can find us. And that we have embedded within that, we're going to have certain aspects within our Discord. We're going to have where you can actually interact with the show. You can send in clips, just direct interaction with Stu and I, etc. Check out the Patreon. Just give it a whirl. See what you think. Just read the menus, and I think you might find some stuff interesting. And we're looking for feedback on all this stuff too. So
absolutely, check it out. If it's something that you think you might be interested in, then
sure.
Drop us a line, let us know, or sign up. And if you got some feedback about it, then again, reach out to us on Twitter.
We're doing this for the community, man. That's what Stu and I talk about as we're sitting around enjoying our libations as we do here at UberCubes. We talk about how can we make a podcast.
It's a hard life,
not just for us.
It's a hard life. We get to sit around and talk about magic and talk about
it's a hard life for us.
Hey, it's fun, and one of the things that why I wanted to get into it was to interact with people. So it's great to hear
and to hang out with me more people. For being true. But other than that, sure. we want to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube.
Yes, everyone,
happy cubing.